over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star. Opened the earth, walking with blood-soaked feet. She challenged the whip, the gun, the knife. She challenged the fire, pulled from the bodies of slaves, made into laws, prisons, and courts.
Good afternoon and welcome back. Is losing your democracy analogous to going bankrupt? You know, in Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises, the character Bill asks Mike how he, Mike, went bankrupt. And Mike replied, 2 ways: gradually, then suddenly. Does America now find itself in a similar situation, a situation wherein this constitutional assault, this constitutional decline or crisis is unfolding slowly with seemingly minor issues that will accumulate over time, resulting or culminating in a sudden and dramatic collapse of our constitutional protections? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they occur in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historical context in which most events take place. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they occur, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the impact that the impact that these events are having on the global village in which we live. On today's episode, the issue before us is, what does it mean when an administration border czar, Tom Homan, says, we're going to make this country safe again. We are not stopping. I don't care what the judges think. We're coming. My guest today is a wonderful analyst, host of the Misty Winston show. Misty Winston, as always, Misty, welcome back.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So first, tell people where they can find you, Misty Winston.
Mostly on Twitter. I'm there fairly regularly, tweeting about anything and everything that's happening during the day. It's kind of my venting machine. So I'm there at Sarcasm Stardust, and then you can catch me making appearances here and there, in addition to hosting shows for myself.
All right. Well, and here and there as well as here. So
exactly.
I want to start with this, Misty, because I think this is a matter of the sum being bigger than its parts. It signals more than or beyond its particular issue. Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, on Monday doubled down on the decision to defy a court order that barred the deportation of alleged Venezuelan gang members, saying, I don't care what the judges think. I don't care what the judges think. Doesn't Tom Homan understand separation of powers and checks and balances?
Clearly not. That's a wild statement to make on national television, right? I mean, to just come out and say, I don't care what judges think. I mean, that is a crazy statement for anybody at any level of government to make. But it's not really all that surprising. I think we've seen the way that the Trump administration has been operating itself this time around. We see the way that they are dismantling different agencies, and which, I mean, that's fine, but there needs to be some sort of, as you mentioned, checks and balances. There needs to be some sort of oversight in people making sure that things are being done the proper way. And in this case, this is very clearly not being done in the proper way. We have them essentially just rounding up hundreds of people. And as you mentioned, alleged gang affiliation. We don't even have any real clear evidence that these are, in fact, gang members. And I think that what's really important, and I think a lot of people are missing here, this is not typical deportation. This is not rounding up Venezuelan citizens and sending them back to Venezuela, who, by the way, Venezuela has said they will happily take back any of their citizens who the United States wants to deport. That's not what's happening here. We are rounding up hundreds of citizens based on, I mean, happens like just rumors. They may or may not have gang affiliations, and we're sending them straight to prison in a third country. Which is insane to me. And, we have a lot of people on the MAGA side of things who have often lamented that their issue with immigration is illegal immigration. Well, if you care about the legality of somebody entering into this country, you should thereby also care about the legality of somebody being deported from this country. And there's no due process happening here. There's nothing about this makes any sense. It is essentially just the Trump administration rounding up hundreds of people, hundreds of brown people with tattoos, labeling them as gang members, and then deporting them to a third country to go straight to prison, one of the worst prisons on planet Earth. And it is astonishing to me that anybody is supportive of this.
So if we go back a month, a couple weeks, little Marco Rubio I mean, that's what Donald dubbed him. So
I know. It's just funny.
Little Marco. With all due respect, Little Marco, Secretary of State, Little Marco, was in El Salvador, and the president, Bukele, or however you pronounce his name, told Rubio, "We will take your prisoners."
Mm-hmm.
And Rubio said, "Well, no one has ever offered that before. That's an interesting offer. We'll have to take it under consideration." So to your point, if you're concerned about people coming into the country illegally, then you should be just as, if not more concerned, since we are a country of laws and not of men, how you remove those people from your country. Is this a testing ground for removing American citizens?
Yes.
People born here. If Donald Trump wants to question birthright citizenship and then illegally deport people, not to the country from whence they've come, but to another country just randomly, I'm going to send them to El Salvador.
Yeah. Yes. And you know what? It's very reminiscent of Guantanamo. This is Guantanamo 2.0. This is exactly what happened. We rounded up hundreds of men who may or may not have had terrorist affiliations, and there was no due process. There was no legal process whatsoever. We just rounded them up. We threw them in a prison. Some of them were there for 10, 15, 20 years with no trial, no charges in some cases. There are still, I think, maybe like a dozen men there to this day. Right. And then those people who we finally released and were allowed to be set free were sent to random third countries, like not their country of origin. They were just, oh, will you take this guy? Sure, we'll send him to Uganda or wherever. And that's happened over the course of hundreds of men throughout the time that Guantanamo has been open. So this is very reminiscent of that. It's very reminiscent of the fact that there has been no legal process here, that there just really is no, I'm not sure the word I'm looking for. There's no, just no process whatsoever. It is framework. Really, Thank you. That's a great way to put it. There's no framework here whatsoever. It is legitimately just essentially kidnapping people and sending them to prison with no legal process whatsoever, with no ability for them to defend themselves. And, people will say, well, I don't want, violent gang members in my country, nor do I. But I also don't want the United States government to have the power and ability to just round up whoever they deem to be a threat, whoever they deem to be violent. We saw the way that the Department of Homeland Security a few years ago put out the domestic violent extremist pamphlet, where they were essentially detailing how they could determine whether or not you yourself were a domestic violent extremist. And it pretty much fit all of us. Any one of us could fit into any of those categories. And I think it's so important that you're questioning, what this is actually the means to an end here, because I feel like this is a testing ground for many things. I think Trump is testing the validity and the strength of the courts. I think he's testing, being able to strip away due process for all of us, not just potentially Venezuelan gang members. There's so much going on here. There's so much at play that I think so many people are overlooking, because especially people who are supporters of Donald Trump, because they hear mass deportations and they're like, yeah, this is a promise kept. This is not a promise kept. This is a massive middle finger to democracy, to due process, to the legal system, to all of those things that we're supposed to hold near and dear in this country. And I think so many people are missing the bigger picture because, they see this as a win for them. This is not a win.
You mentioned the remaining inmates at Guantanamo, and you mentioned 12, and I'm not certain on the number, but that's a good number for the sake of the conversation. And one of the things that people need to really understand, some of those individuals are still there because the United States has tortured them to such a degree that they are now insane.
Yes.
I'm going to repeat that. The United States has tortured, waterboarded, all sensory deprivation, other types of tactics, and these individuals their mental state has deteriorated to such a degree that they can no longer participate in their own defense if they were to go to trial. That's what we've become.
Yeah. Yes. And I've actually interviewed, I don't know if you're familiar with Mansour Adaifi. He was a Guantanamo detainee. He was there for many years. He has a fantastic book out if anybody is curious. He's one of the most amazing human beings I've ever spoken to. He has no hate in his heart. He has completely forgiven the people that literally tortured him. He's forgiven them. He holds them in no ill will towards them whatsoever. I don't have that in me. If I were kidnapped and imprisoned wrongfully and then tortured for over a decade, I would have hate in my heart. I 100% know that I would, and he does not. But his book is fantastic. I will warn people, though, it is very difficult to read. And I mean, we have the Guantanamo files from WikiLeaks. Thanks to Julian Assange, we saw the methods of torture that were being used there. And many of those people were arrested without cause. They had no terrorist affiliations. They just happened to be brown and in the wrong place at the wrong time. And did they maybe get a few bad apples in the whole sweep up? Sure. And just as they may be getting some actual Venezuelan gang members in this roundup. But that's the point of due process, is being able to separate those people and being able to make sure that we're not unjustly imprisoning somebody. The prison that these people are being sent to is horrific.
Yes.
I don't want a single innocent person to spend one single second. Frankly, I'm not sure anybody should ever spend a single second in a prison like that. It is awful, just an awful, horrifying place. But I certainly don't want a single innocent person to spend 1 second of one day in that prison. And the idea that anybody would be okay with such a massive sweep like this, where there is no due process, there is no method of defense, there is no way for these people to defend themselves, their name, their honor, and to avoid, forget the deportation aspect of it. If you want to deport people who are here illegally, okay, we can have that conversation, but that deportation there needs to be a legal process, and they need to be sent back to their country of origin, and it needs to be done in a proper manner. Sending somebody straight to prison with no trial, no due process, no investigation, no nothing, in a third country is, there's no way that you can ever justify that, in my opinion.
And I don't ask this question rhetorically. I ask this question because I don't know the answer. These are Venezuelans. You're deporting Venezuelans. So why not send them to Venezuela?
Right?
I mean, that I'm not, excuse me for being simplistic here, but I would think if you want to deport Venezuelans, you would send them to Venezuela. Why spend $6 million? That's the number I saw.
Mm-hmm.
Why spend $6 million to send these people to El Salvador unless there's another agenda behind the program?
For sure. There has to be. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the government of Venezuela has said, we will take our people. If there are Venezuelan citizens that you wish to deport, we will take them. We will happily. And so the idea that we are just shipping them off to some prison in El Salvador, with no real explanation, at least to my knowledge, if I'm incorrect and there has been some explanation given to why this is what we're doing with these people, somebody please enlighten me, because I have not seen anything yet. I have not seen, we're not even sure that the people that we are sending off are actually gang members or criminals in any way. So, it makes no sense. And so I think that that's a fair question, certainly, to ask.
And folks, I started this by asking the question about democracy and bankruptcy. Is losing your democracy analogous to going bankrupt? And again, in The Sun Also Rises, Mike replies, well, I went bankrupt two ways, gradually, then suddenly. And I think that's an incredibly apt description for what we're going through now. And there are a lot of folks, Misty, that are incredibly surprised, saying, I didn't vote for this.
Yes.
No, folks, you did.
You did.
Because Steve Bannon, the Donald Trump whisperer, told you in 2016 what they were going to do.
Mm-hmm.
He was very clear about deconstructing the administrative state. He was very clear about what he called flooding the zone. He was very, meaning we're going to hit this like a tornado. We're going to throw so much stuff out there that people won't know what to respond to.
Mm-hmm.
He talked about and folks, you can hear all of this. I want to say it was a Frontline. I think it was Frontline. It was either Frontline or CNN 2019 interview with Steve Bannon. He told you this. And then yes, Steve Bannon, after getting Trump in office, went to Brazil and did the same thing to get Bolsonaro elected. And where is Bolsonaro now? He's in court for attempting a coup against Lula da Silva.
Yeah. Listen, there's nothing that irritates me more right now than the people who are like, I didn't vote for this. Donald Trump has never been shy about telling you exactly who he is. He's not, now with him starting to, saber rattle with Iran, everybody's like, I didn't vote. Yes, you did. He's never been shy about this stuff. He has been very clear about who he is. He's been very clear about the mass deportation thing. And I think that frankly, it is, it's absurd at this point to continue to pretend like you didn't know what you were voting for. Of course you did. If you didn't, then you have bigger issues that you need to account for, because you're either just not paying attention, or your brain is dysfunctional in some way, or your cognitive dissonance is far too powerful. I don't know what it is, but people need to really start to evaluate that, because again, it's not just Trump. Our political system at large is very open about how it operates. If you just merely look at it, all you have to do is just simply pay attention, and it is very obvious who it serves, and it's not us. So the idea that people are still pretending as if, that we can vote our way out of this, it's just very frustrating for me. So yes, if you voted for Donald John Trump, you voted for exactly this. And a lot of people, what I think might be even more depressing is a lot of people are excited about this. They're cheering it on. They're very pumped about the fact that he is rounding up hundreds of people and sending them straight to prison, which I'm not sure exactly what that says about those people. But I'm here to tell you, as much as you hate the brown people that he is, deporting, I don't even think that that's a fair term to be using, but we'll just, for the sake of the conversation, we'll just say deporting. If you don't think that this, as Wilmer mentioned earlier, this is coming for us too. This is the erasure of our rights. This is the erasure of due process as a whole. And they always do these things in this manner. It's no different than, for example, the way that they started to erode our free speech rights was to go after Alex Jones. They choose a figure or an issue or a cause that they feel like they can galvanize people behind. A lot of people dislike Alex Jones. We'll go after him. Then people will cheer on the fact that we are silencing him, that we're taking away his free speech rights. And then they just start to peck away at it. They don't do these things overnight. It is a death by 1,000 cuts. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. This is just another way that they are slowly erasing your rights. This really has nothing to do with Venezuelan gangs. This is about them wanting to take away your rights. And I think a lot of people are missing that.
And in listening to you, what just came to mind, again, as people are saying, I didn't vote for this, what they're really saying is, or when they say, I didn't think this was going to happen, what they're really saying is, I didn't think this would happen to me.
Yes.
That's what they're saying. They're saying, and I know you live in Ohio. These are, and I'm just picking this as an example. These are folks in the Midwest, in some of the smaller towns of Ohio, who are now watching their health clinic close. And now they're going to have, instead of driving 20 minutes to this local health clinic, they're going to have to drive an hour and 20 minutes to a larger city, to a hospital. They're saying, I didn't think this was going to happen to me in the Midwest. I voted for Donald Trump. These are the folks in larger cities that are looking at at elderly people having their Social Security office closed, saying, well, now you're going to have to, in order to get or put in a claim for your Social Security benefits, you're going to have to show up in person to a Social Security office that Elon Musk has now ordered closed.
Yeah.
I didn't vote for this. No. What you're saying is, I didn't think it would happen to me.
Yes. And I think that that's really important for people to come to terms with, because I feel like so much of the country, sadly, has that mentality that they're fine with these things happening to other people, and they only care when it happens to them. And that's a very frustrating thing to witness. I think that we've been so stripped of our humanity and our ability to empathize with our neighbors. And that's intentional too. I feel like that has been a very intentional deconstruction of our humanity, of our ability to relate to one another as individual humans coming together. And I think that is a huge problem that we need to overcome. I think COVID certainly accelerated that. It had us all isolated in our houses for a couple of years. And I think that we have really just lost the ability to relate to one another and to look at each other as a neighbor and not as an enemy. And they've done a very good job, an unbelievably good job of, creating these divisions. And I mean, really, that's all electoral politics is about creating divisions, because we're much easier to control when we're divided. And so they've created these divisions where you see your neighbor as your enemy. My enemy is not my neighbor. My enemy wears a, $5,000 suit and sits in a boardroom. That's who my enemy is. My enemy is the people who are making these decisions that are adversely affecting my neighbors. My neighbors have very little power or control over what's happening to me on a daily basis. And while we may have disagreements, that's okay. It's okay to disagree on the way that things are, the way that things should be, how we get there, all of that stuff. But we can't even begin to have those conversations amongst ourselves until we deal with the system that has been designed to kill us all. I mean, that's what we're really fighting here. Is we're fighting a system that is very clearly and very quickly stripping us of all of our rights. It is making our lives unmanageable and unlivable. People can't even afford to put food on the table. And you want to see your neighbor as the enemy. That's exactly what they want you to do. And I think that this whole immigration thing, I mean, if we're going to talk about immigration, and I try to bring this up as often as possible because this is very, very rarely talked about. If you have an issue with immigration, you need to deal with our foreign policy, because that is the reason why there is such an influx of people immigrating to this country and to other countries in Europe and wherever else, is because we are blowing up other countries and leaving those people with no choice but to flee. And that is the problem. If you want to deal with immigration, if you want to prevent people, very few people on earth want to leave their homeland just for funsies. They leave their homeland because they're left with no other choice. Their country has been made unlivable. It is unsafe, whatever it is. And that is the issue. And so often people want to have these conversations about immigration and how do we deal with it and mass deportations and all of this stuff. If you want to stop it, it's pretty simple. Stop blowing up other people's countries. Stop destroying other people's countries through sanctions. And, stop overthrowing democratically elected governments and installing puppet dictators and then running their country into the ground and stealing their resources. That is how you deal with the immigration crisis. If you want to stop immigration, stop destroying other people's countries. Those people will then not have reason to leave. They will have no reason to make a dangerous and arduous trek to some other country trying to survive. It's very, very rarely discussed when these conversations are being had.
It's never discussed.
No.
I never heard Kamala Harris say that once.
No, of course not.
Never heard Joe Biden say that once.
No.
And you and I have been at this now for a couple of years, and you, I'm sure, have gotten sick of hearing me make that very point.
I get tired of making it myself. Yes.
And in fact, really quickly, I have MSNBC CIA on here and Donald Trump is claiming that the Venezuelan deportees are members of this
Tren de Aragua.
Thank you. And also, so here's the question, and this is a question that has to be asked damn near every day. Donald, you claim that all of these deportees are members of Tren de Aragua. How do you know that? Where is the evidence of such? The operative term there is evidence. Mm-hmm. You have not had any hearings. You have not had any proceedings to determine the status of these individuals. In fact, in some instances, from what I've been reading, you don't even know, Donald, that you've got the right people that you were looking for, because there has been no due process. So, and then the other point, back to the stop blowing up people's countries, and this is the most recent example that I use to this point. Chiquita Brands was found guilty in Superior Court in Florida in October of 2024 of having funded death squads in Colombia. Mm-hmm. So that could be one reason why at least a whole bunch of Colombians have felt compelled to leave Colombia and come here, because Chiquita Brands, a US-based corporation, was convicted of spending millions of dollars funding death squads in Colombia. You ask why they're coming. That's one example as to why. And I could go to the book, Stephen Kinzer's book, Overthrow.
Yes.
For those that might want to get a broader historic context, you can go to Stephen Kinzer's Overthrow, and this takes you back to U.S. policy starting back in the 1940s, how we captured the what were known as the Sandwich Islands, what we now call Hawaii. We can start there and come forward. So, okay. You know, when you mentioned folks hating brown people, that made me think about this fentanyl excuse that Donald Trump is using as he's talking about taking over Canada, and he's talking about Mexico and the flood of fentanyl that, you know, and the data shows only about 1% of the fentanyl that's coming into the country actually comes from Canada. But that then made me think about, what about methamphetamine?
Mm-hmm.
If Donald Trump and his minions decide to change the focus from fentanyl to meth, when we look at the ethnic dynamic in this country and what ethnic groups use what types of drugs, as in African Americans historically were smoking crack cocaine, while white Americans were using powder cocaine. When you look at who's using methamphetamine in this country, it ain't people that look like me.
No, it's people that look like me. And you mentioned, that Black people historically have been known to use crack cocaine. Well, where did they get the crack from? Because I think that we should probably examine the fact that the United States government has had a very heavy hand in the influx of drugs also in this country. So if you want to talk about the fentanyl crisis, I'd be curious to see what level of involvement the United States government has in the fentanyl crisis. Because, I mean, listen, this is not a conspiracy. This is a proven and known fact that the United States government, the CIA, had a very heavy hand in the crack crisis in the Black communities. That was very intentionally driven to shut them up, essentially. The Black people were getting too brave, too bold, and didn't know their place anymore. So we got to take them out. So what did they do? They introduced crack cocaine into their neighborhoods, arrested all their men, and that solved their problem for them. They did the same thing with the hippie movement. This is a known thing. This is not something that they're unfamiliar with. This is known tactics and territory for them. So, I mean, if you wanted, listen, the pharmaceutical companies, they own our government. And we've had a massive pharmaceutical crisis for a very long time. So I think that is something that people also need to keep in the back of their minds, that, Donald Trump talking about how fentanyl is really all important to him. No, it's not. He doesn't care. He doesn't care that your kids are doing fentanyl. He could care less. In fact, I'm sure he's probably grateful for it. It keeps your kids easier to control if they're all on, doing drugs and in the streets. So I think that that's something that people really need to keep in mind, that these people don't care about you. They don't care about your family. All they care about is how to control you and how to keep you in your place. That's really all that matters to them. And I think that that's really what all this comes down to.
And another example of this is heroin.
Yes.
And we can look at in the early 70s, as soldiers were returning from Vietnam, and many of them soldiers of color were returning to the United States addicted to heroin. Well, they were just discarded as junkies. But then we fast forward to, I guess, the mid 90s and the opioid crisis. And the opioid crisis, to a greater degree, was manifesting itself in middle class and upper middle class white communities. And that's when the country started paying attention. Oh, we have a health crisis here, because as the oxycodone and those other pills started to become harder for many middle class white women to get, they and their children started turning to the cheaper offset called heroin. And we started seeing a rise in the use of heroin in teenagers and in their parents who were addicted to opioids but found a cheaper solution in heroin. And now, there's a whole lot more to that, I realize, but that is a reality, another example of what it is you're talking about.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that, the country may have started paying attention once that started happening, but they sure didn't care to hold the people responsible for it accountable. The Sackler family will never spend a day in prison, despite the fact that they lied to people about the how, you know, habit forming these things were and how safe they were, how effective they were, all of those things. I mean, again, the pharmaceutical companies own our government, and that is just a fact of our situation. And so that's really what I think people, it's very easy to look at these things surface level and, you know, be like, this is an issue, but most of the time when you're looking at those types of things, it's simply a symptom. That's all it is. And you really have to dig in and find the broader picture. And I think that that is the case with, you know, the drug situation that we're discussing, or if you're looking at immigration, talking about our foreign policy. So many people, and I mean, connecting the dots, we're on the show. So many people are incapable of connecting the dots because they, whatever their cause du jour is, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people who just don't like brown people see mass deportations as this massive win. And I think that that's exactly how, you know, the powers that shouldn't be are able to be so effective, because they kind of, they're able to dig their claws into these issues that they know get people fired up. These are very emotionally driven issues. And once your emotions kick in, your ability to think critically turn off. And I think that that is, once they initiate the fear of a certain thing, and that's certainly what they're doing here with these Venezuelan gangs. They fear monger about these things. Oh, these gangs are coming in, they're taking over, they're going to rape your women and children. And again, nobody wants dangerous Venezuelan gang members in our country. Of course not. That's absurd. Of course not. I don't want white dangerous gang members running the streets. You know what I'm saying? I don't want any dangerous gang members running the streets of this country. I think we can all agree on that. But I think that what they're able to do is, by initiating that fear response, is that they're willing, then people become willing to just be like, oh, well, who cares about due process then? What, we don't care about, just get them off the streets. Nobody cares about due process. But in doing that, you are then relinquishing your own due process, because once they take it away from, you know, Venezuelan immigrants, you don't think it's coming for you. We have historical reference for this. We have, this precedent has been set time and time and time and time again. Once you lose these rights, once anybody loses the right, you don't get them back. They don't just give them back. I mean, the Patriot Act was passed when? We still don't have those rights back. So I think that that's what makes them so effective on this front, is that they're able to initiate the fear response. People, their critical thinking skills turn completely off, and you are able to relinquish all of your rights for some, you know, perceived or promised safety. And that's just not the way that this works.
And final point on this opioid issue, folks, I think if you were to plot this on a chart, on a graph, and you looked at the X and Y axis, you would see that the precipitant drop in the cost of heroin correlated with the United States going into Afghanistan. And that was predicted. It was predicted that you would see a dramatic drop in the cost of heroin on the international markets as the United States went into Afghanistan. And I believe the reporting was Hamid Karzai's brother was one of the drug lords in Afghanistan. Where is Hamid Karzai from? Afghanistan. And his brother has been reported as being a drug lord. So just wanted to put the final connect that dot. Misty, Donald Trump keeps telling us this is a time of war, quote unquote. This is a time of war. Folks, let me clearly explain to you, it is not.
No.
It is not. We have not been in war since 1942. That was World War II. There was no Korean War because Congress did not declare a war. There was no Vietnam War. Those were conflicts, because the only way the United States can get into war, go to Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, Congress shall have the power to declare war. This is more of the language that Misty was just referring to, fear-mongering. We have these immigrants, these hordes of immigrants. They are invading our country. And in order for us to deal with this invasion, we find ourselves at war. No, we don't.
No,
Misty.
no, we don't. And I think that that's, again, it's so frustrating to watch how effective this method of narrative management, propaganda, whatever you want to call it, because if you pay attention, anytime that a politician is speaking, they will always lead with fear. And the reason why they do that is because anything you hear after you're afraid will suddenly, again, your critical thinking skills turn off and you'll buy just about anything that they're selling after you're afraid. And we see them use this on all manner of issues, but it's precisely, this is another thing that makes me so irritated with people when they say, I didn't vote for this, when they're talking about Donald Trump said he was going to end the wars. Are you completely, like, does your brain work at all? Like, this is not a guy who's ever been particularly shy about the fact that he loves him some war. This is the guy that dropped the mother of all bombs, more drone strikes than Obama. I mean, this is not a peace guy. And it was always very interesting to me that he was
sent missiles into Ukraine.
Exactly. He is. I mean, now he's going to end the Ukraine war or whatever you want to call it in 24 hours. It's a little overdue. He was all braggadocious about how he could end it in 24 hours. You're a little late, my friend. But the idea that anybody thought that he's one of the biggest reasons why it kicked off to begin with. And so again, the idea that he is some peace candidate, that he's going to be some peace president is completely absurd. And so many people, now that he's starting to do the saber rattling again, and we're having all these conversations about potentially entering into another conflict, frankly, and we may have talked about this the last time I was on your show. I think that the whole winding down of the Ukraine situation is simply just so that they can focus their energy elsewhere. That's all that is. That's all that is. That they're just going to pull back from the Ukraine-Russia situation so that they can focus elsewhere. We've done this. Afghanistan ended and war didn't end. We just focused the energy elsewhere. So I think that that's exactly what we're seeing him do right now.
Well, in fact, let's take one step back from that. Iraq ended, and we went into Afghanistan.
Yep.
Afghanistan ended. We went into Ukraine. So, folks,
as Julian Assange said, George Orwell said, the goal is not a successful war. The goal is an endless war. It is a money laundering operation. All wars are a racket. Smedley Butler told us that ages ago. And that's really all that this is, that they just need perpetual war in order to funnel money where they want it to go. And, the CEO of Boeing needs another yacht. So sorry, some people are going to have to die. That's just the way that it works.
And you can go back to July of 20, when the CEO of Boeing, whose name now is escaping me, it'll come to me in a minute, was asked the question, who would Boeing prefer be president, Donald Trump or Joe Biden? And his answer was, doesn't matter. We're going to get paid anyway. Because they both understand what our interests are.
Yeah. Listen, our economy is based on death and chaos and destruction. We have a military industrial complex based economy. That's it. That's who we are as a country. That's something we really need to come to terms with. That's an ugly reality. I think a lot of people don't want to come to terms with that because that's a big thing to wrap your head around. But we slaughter people for profit. That's what we do. And that's just the sad reality of who we are as a country. Now, that doesn't have to be who we are as a country, but until people come to that realization and start to push back on that, that's who we are. It's kind of who we've always been. We slaughter people for profit. And that's been our MO, as we were talking about earlier. We go around from country to country invading, or if we can't invade, we just overthrow their democratically elected governments and install puppet dictators. We rob them of their resources. We slaughter their people. We leave them completely broken. And then we move on to the next. And that's what we do. That's what we've always done. And so, again, the idea that, we have the United States government talking about, these terrorist organizations. The United States of America is the world's largest terrorist organization. Let's just be honest about it. That is the reality of who we are as a country. And people get very angry with me when I say that, but that's just reality. You cannot look at the way that we operate across the globe. But who else has that many military bases across? Nobody. We have like 1,000 military bases across the globe. We are terrorists.
How many bases does Russia have outside of Russia?
Not many. Yeah, I think I was going to say 5, but yeah, like not. Yeah, we have 1,000. Wilmer, 1,000. That's insane on every level. And can you imagine if Russia put a military base on our border? We would be nuking them today. It would take an hour. But we feel like as if we have some special privileges or that we are the world's policeman or whatever. And we want to, wag our finger at Vladimir Putin or at some, tiny indigenous group somewhere that's fighting back against an occupation or whatever. And, we want to finger wag and pretend like we are, we're above all that. We're the worst. We are the worst. There's just really no question. I think you're muted. Something happened.
So to that point, for all intents and purposes, up to this point, this has been a Donald Trump / Republican conversation. But it's important for people to understand it takes two to tango.
Yes.
And we would not be where we are now. And I'll just use the most recent history. We wouldn't be where we are right now if it weren't for Democrats' capitulation, if it weren't for Democrats' initiative. Because remember, folks, Ukraine started, well, of course, Donald Trump sent missiles into Ukraine, but the conflict actually started under Joe Biden. Joe Biden tried to pick a fight with China over Taiwan. Those weren't Republicans doing that. Nancy Pelosi flew into Taiwan to antagonize China against everybody's advice. Nancy, don't do that. Nancy, do not fly that plane into the South China Sea and go. Nancy, don't do that. She ignored all of that. It was Joe Biden that I believe told us that Juan Guaido was the president of Venezuela and seized the Venezuelan embassy in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
So folks, this is not a partisan conversation. We were just talking about Donald Trump because he's the guy in the hot seat at the moment. So with that being said, as we move over to the next issue, Nancy Pelosi has told us that Chuck Schumer's agreement to vote for the continuing resolution, she says, I never give up anything for nothing. Congressman Glenn Ivey recently said, maybe it's time for new leadership in the Senate. The Democrats are in disarray because they are being exposed. Don't make any mistakes here, folks. They're being exposed for their capitulation with the Republicans. To me, that's what this is really all about. Misty Winston.
And I'm so glad that you brought this up because, currently I go really hard after Trump and Musk because they're the ones in perceived power, right? And people get very angry with me. Why don't you ever go after Democrats? Folks, my Twitter timeline is free to search. You can go back and look. I am no friend or fan of Democrats. I go after all politicians equally. I hate them all. Okay. Let's just make that very abundantly clear. And I mean, you talk about the Ukraine situation. The Maidan coup happened under Barack Obama in 2014. This is very much a bipartisan across the aisle thing. They all, listen, we need to be very honest here. There are not two parties.
Wait a minute, because I can't let this one go. Since you brought up the Maidan coup, folks, the Ukraine and Russia reached a peace agreement
Mm-hmm.
in April. This thing started in February.
Mm-hmm.
They reached an agreement in April, and Joe Biden was in office
Yes.
when Boris Johnson went to Ukraine and told Zelensky the West will not back a peace agreement now.
Yeah.
I just had to make that data point, had to connect that dot.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Continue.
important
I'm
because
sorry to have
people
interrupted.
people need to be aware of these things. And they, typically speaking, if you're of one of the two cults, you only hear your side of the story, whatever your team is selling you, and that's what you hear and you believe, and you don't bother to listen to any outside information. And I think that that's another issue that we're facing in this country, is that people don't want to look outside of their little bubble for any contradictory information. It hurts their feelings. But we need to be very honest. There are not two parties. Listen, George Carlin told us this ages ago. It's a big club. You're not in it. And they are all owned and operated by basically the exact same people. There are some differences here or there. Big oil tends to favor the right a little bit more. Big tech seems to favor the left a little bit more. But generally speaking, all of your politicians are owned and operated by the exact same people, and they're serving the exact same agenda. It's all smoke and mirrors. I like to call it a soap opera, but with psychopaths. They're pretending to hate each other. They go to the same dinner parties. They vacation together. Their kids go to the same school. They're in the same club, and you are not in it. They do not serve you. And so I think that that's something that people really need to wrap their heads around, is that it doesn't matter. Like I said earlier, you can't vote your way out of this, because it doesn't matter who you vote for. The military industrial complex is going to win. Big pharma is going to win. Big oil is going to win. All of these, your government is completely owned, and it has been for a very long time. It was bought and paid for. Israel's always going to win. It's bought and paid for. So it's really absurd to think that one side or the other is going to save you. They're not. And you mentioned the Democrats being in disarray. This has been one of those things that's been kind of happening for some time now. I think it really started with the Bernie Sanders situation in 2015, 2016. I think that opened a lot of people's eyes. Thank you to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks for exposing so much of the corruption in the Hillary Clinton campaign and within the Democratic Party, the way that the media was working hand in hand with them, the way that fundraising was so corrupt, and the way that they were screwing over Bernie Sanders and his supporters without any hesitation whatsoever, the way that they weren't having a free and fair primary. All of that stuff was exposed very much thanks to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. And I think that opened a lot of people's eyes. Yes. And I think that opened a lot of people's eyes. And I think since then, there has been a kind of a cataclysmic snowball effect where the Democratic Party just can't seem to regain their control. And I think more and more people over time are recognizing what's happening here. And I think refusing to hold a primary this past time was another nail in the coffin. I think that, running Joe Biden, all of these things, I think it's just been an accumulative effect where so many people are recognizing the corruption within the Democratic Party. And I think it's very important that people recognize that it is not one or the other. It is both. Both parties are incredibly corrupt. They're owned and operated by the exact same people, and they do not care about you, and they do not work for you.
And another example of this, it has manifested itself again, starting, today is Wednesday, starting Monday. You mentioned the military industrial complex, AIPAC.
Mm-hmm.
AIPAC, and here's folks why I say that. Chuck Schumer just wrote a book about anti-Semitism in America. Thank you, Misty. And so he's on MSNBC last night. And he's had to cancel his book tour because out of fear of his own security, because now that he voted for the continuing resolution, a whole lot of folks are angry at him. So he's got to keep his silly behind in between Brooklyn and DC. So he's on MSNBC last night promoting his book. And then I turn on Morning Joe this morning, and the guy that's the head of the Anti-Defamation League, Greenblatt, he's on talking about anti-Semitism. And so now you've got Donald Trump, who's put together this anti-Semitism task force that is
Mhm.
going to 5 cities, supposedly protecting Jews against anti-Semitism. Folks, it's not anti-Semitism, it's
No.
anti-Zionism.
Yes.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
And to your point, or to your earlier point about immigrants coming to this country, if you want to put an end to anti-Semitism, stop the genocide in Palestine.
Yes, that would be a great place to start.
You'll see a dramatic decrease.
Yeah.
And stop equating, stop conflating, stop
Yes.
comparing anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. The two are not. And so really quickly, then I'm going to come back to you. So Greenblatt, they're talking about Mahmoud Khalil. And today with Greenblatt on Morning Joe. And he says, well, everyone's First Amendment rights should be protected. We don't have a problem with what Mahmoud Khalil says. Greenblatt says, my concern is what he does. And what he's doing is he was the leader of the anti-apartheid protest at Columbia.
Mm-hmm.
Being against apartheid is of concern to you, Mr. Greenblatt? Maybe because the strongest supporter of South Africa during apartheid was who? Israel. And then he says, and it's his actions. He was handing out literature about Hamas at Columbia. Oh my God.
Can't have people reading. Can't have people reading.
A piece of paper. Folks.
Yeah, it's absurd. And I'm glad that you brought up that it is anti-Zionism, not anti-Semitism, because listen, Judaism and Zionism are not the same thing. We need to be abundantly clear about that. Judaism is a thousands-year-old religion that millions of people practice peacefully and without any thirst for genocide or conflict or anything like that every day, all day. Zionism, on the other hand, is an unbelievably genocidal, brutal political ideology. It's not a religion. Yes, it is 100%. 100%. Yes, 100%. And if you have any humanity whatsoever, you will be anti-Zionist.
That has co-opted Judaism.
Yes, to use as a shield. It's disgusting. It is disgusting the way that they hide behind the cloak of Judaism to perpetuate the same things that happened to the Jewish people. You know what I'm saying? They are literally committing a genocide against Palestinian people, hiding behind Judaism. I can't think of anything more disgusting. It is so vile to me. Maybe I can think of one thing, and that is lying about 40 beheaded babies in order to justify the actual slaughter of thousands of Palestinian children every single day. That's pretty gross. But yes, and I think that's, I think it's crucial that people hear that truth, because the anti-Semitism stuff, if you don't see that as an unbelievable and incredibly dangerous threat against free speech, you need to ball your hand up into a little fist and punch yourself in the face, because you earned it. This is this is just another one of those steps toward stripping you of all rights to speech. And this has been happening for a very long time. This is nothing new. As I mentioned earlier, these are the kinds of things that they slow roll. If they came in overnight and took away your right to speech, you'd freak out. Everybody would freak out. We'd all be in the streets. They do it slowly over the course of time, just little bits stripping you away of these rights. And that's exactly what these anti-Semitism, and this is not new. These anti-Semitism laws have, there was a speech and language pathologist who lost her job at a school in Texas years ago for refusing to pledge allegiance to the state of Israel. As an American, she lost her job for refusing to pledge allegiance to a foreign country. That's crazy business. And that's been happening for a very long time. You lose, certain businesses will lose contracts or whatever.
Texas.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
Texas did this.
Yes, it happens all the time. So this is not new, but it is starting to amplify. They are starting to really ramp this up. And I think that that's really what all of this is about. And not only that, I think it's obviously just another way that they can shield Israel from accountability for the genocide that they're committing. And that's, they don't want you to be able to criticize them for it. They want you to be afraid to criticize them for it. So they're trying to really, and again, induce that fear. So that you will not run around speaking the truth about what Israel is doing. That's exactly what they're doing right now.
And two things quickly, if you can give me just a couple more minutes.
Yeah, of course.
Two things quickly. One is you mentioned that this whole anti-Semitism rhetoric is ramping up, and it's ramping up because the Zionist proponents of all of this realize they're losing the argument.
Yes.
They're losing in Gaza, folks. And some might look at the pictures and say, Wilmer, Gaza has become a desolate wasteland. I say this all the time, and people need to understand a resistance movement has a different objective than the oppressor. And the fact that Hamas, after all of this, is still there and to a great degree is still running Gaza amidst all of the desolation and all of the destruction and all of the rubble, the fact that they're still there is a win for them. Their objective is, and folks, I'm not picking sides here. I'm just trying to give you some as clearly and unbiased analysis as I can. The objective of the Zionist government of Israel as the oppressor is, by their own admission, the elimination of Hamas.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that Hamas is still there means they have not accomplished their mission. That means they're losing. And so not only are they losing there on the ground, they're also losing the hearts and the minds of people all around the world. And
Big
that's
time.
why they now have to use mainstream media to promote this lie about this inflation of Zionism. And Zionism is wrong. I mean, what did I say?
Anti-Semitism.
Anti-Semitism is wrong.
They've manufactured an anti-Semitism crisis in order to benefit themselves. Yes.
Okay. Now, final point for you, and I want to go back to this because I think it's very important. Let me find my note here. And that is Elon Musk is now trying to rally support. And folks, this gets back to how your democracy dies slowly and then rapidly. Elon Musk seeks to rally support for impeachment of judge who ruled against Trump. So much so that Chief Justice Roberts had to issue a statement saying, it's been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision. The normal appellate review process exists for that purpose. Now, Misty, you can interpret this a couple of ways. One is that's John Roberts telling Donald Trump, look, stupid, we don't impeach judges.
Yeah.
It could also be John Roberts saying, look, stupid, you put us here for a reason. Let us do what you put us here to do. Don't make unnecessary waves. When the issues get to us, we got you.
Yeah.
But the longer you stand in the street screaming, the harder you make it for us to do what you sent us here to do.
Yeah.
It could be interpreted either way. Misty Winston.
For sure. And I think that something that people need to be aware of is that, the Trump is very much trying to paint this as, oh, well, this guy was appointed by Obama, so he's bad, right?
Actually, no, he was appointed by Bush.
The guy that he's trying to get impeached?
Yes, he was originally appointed by George W.
Well, Trump is trying to paint it as he's an Obama judge.
No. Let me just quickly let me set the record straight. He was originally appointed to a lower court by W. Bush and then promoted by Obama to the position he's in now.
Well, Trump is very much trying to paint it as he's an Obama guy. And I think that that's super interesting because essentially what he's saying is because he's an Obama appointee, I don't have to listen to him. Well, Trump himself appointed hundreds of federal judges throughout his first term. Does that mean that Democratic presidents don't have to listen to anything that those judges have to say? It's absurd on every level. And Elon Musk is, of course, trying to paint them as activist judges. And there's no question that there are judges who certainly do a little bit of activism in their jobs, which they shouldn't do. But there's no question that there are. But Elon Musk himself is an activist. That's what he's doing. He is trying to
African activist.
Yeah. And it's just the way that they are behaving, the way that they are conducting themselves. I think it is, people are talking about a constitutional crisis and all of these things. And I think I'm not convinced that that's not intentional. I think that Trump thrives on the chaos. I think that he is able to get much more done when there's a lot of chaos happening around him. I think that there's a little bit of a distraction with all of this happening because there's so many other things that he's under fire for, the war stuff and all of that. A lot of his supporters are very angry about that. So there's a little bit of him trying to distract, I think. But I think that, people just, again, this is not a left or a right issue. This is not a Democrat or Republican issue. This is very much a system issue. And until we start to deal with that reality, this kind of stuff is just going to keep happening over. We're on a hamster wheel and we're just going to stay there until people snap out of it and recognize that it's us against them. It's not left against right. And that's where we need to be headed.
Misty Winston, as always, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for that clarity. Greatly, greatly appreciate it. And as always, look forward to having you back.
Anytime. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Misty. Enjoy the rest of your day. Folks, thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. We've got about 6,000 subscribers. We're trying to get to 7,000 by Friday, and only you can prevent forest fires, and only you can help us with that effort. Please, we need you to reach out to those you know and subscribe to the program. That's what's going to enable us to continue this mission that we are on. Stay tuned. New episode tomorrow. And follow, subscribe, leave a review, share the show. Follow us on social media. You can find all the links below in the show description. And remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge, because talk without analysis is just chatter. And as you can see with what we just went through with Misty Winston, we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See y'all tomorrow. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a blessed remainder of your day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.